The Mesa Verde, or Green Table. This national park is located around 60 kilometers from the small town of Durango in the US state of Colorado. It has only one main entrance. The US 160 highway leads to the park's checkpoint. Owing to its peak season during the summer months, there's sometimes a queue of traffic that stretches for several kilometers. With its numerous tunnels and bends, the park's road winds its way up to the plateau. The park's main road is 34 kilometers long. Unlike most national parks in North America, and despite the Mesa Verde's magnificent rock and stone formations, the observation of nature is not the main reason that most people come here. Instead, it is the early traces of civilization that are responsible for attracting the hordes of visitors who come here each year. Various spectacular vantage points are located along the park's winding road, such as that of Park Point. At 2,613 meters above sea level, it is the highest section of the park. The panoramic view across the extensive desert foothills of the Rocky Mountains seems almost endless. Those who come here can enjoy a view that covers an area of more than 100 kilometers and takes in no less than 4 states. Apart from its famous archaeological sites, the Mesa Verde National Park also plays an important role in the protection of the southwest of the USA's unique animal and plant life. The strange remains of vegetation are scattered here and there. The climate has always been of much significance in this region. The lives of the first Native American Indian inhabitants of this plateau were often determined by the weather, and they set great store by its powers. landscape and climate were good to the Anasazi Indians, otherwise known as the ancestors, a name that originates from the Navajo Indians. Here in the Mesa Verde is where the origins of an advanced North American civilization can be found. The Spruce Tree House cliff dwelling was named after the red fir. It was created during the early days of the Anasazi. The oldest traces of human habitation here date back almost 12,000 years. For several centuries, the region's Indians lived on top of the high plateau. At first, the Anasazi survived mainly by hunting, but in the course of time they developed skills and knowledge in agriculture. As long as there was sufficient rain, the inhabitants of the Mesa Verde successfully cultivated corn and beans. At that time, the Indians possessed no building skills. Thus, the Anasazi lived inside large natural caves. The impressive settlement of Spruce Tree House dates back to a later time. It was most likely founded in the 12th century, but its inhabitants deserted it during the 13th. For almost 600 years, the buildings were uninhabited. It was only at the end of the 19th century that these exceptionally well-preserved buildings were discovered. Because the cliff dwellings are located quite close to the center of the park, the number of visitors has increased. According to archaeologists, between 100 and 150 people once lived within the 114 rooms of Spruce Tree House. This was when the Anasazi civilization was at its zenith. Ruins Road travels through Navajo Canyon. It leads past the national park's most important archaeological sites. Surrounded by deep canyons and mighty rock walls, each Indian settlement seemed to be completely detached from the other. But this was not so. Today, scientists believe that there was frequent contact between the remote villages of the Mesa Verde, and even a degree of collaboration. Today it's possible to discern the faint traces of paths within the rock walls. The steep cliffs still show traces of climbing and the ancient paths of the Anasazi. Great ceremonial buildings such as the Sun Temple were most likely the result of amicable communication between the neighbouring villages of the canyons. This untouched and desolate wilderness is timeless. Throughout the centuries, little has changed within the Indian cliff settlements. The natural landscape of the Mesa Verde and its characteristic vegetation is the same now as it was in the past. Even so, the park's plant life now plays second fiddle to its abundance of archaeological treasures. The cliff dwellings are the park's main attraction. The ruins of the Anasazi Indians lie within the park's rock walls. Some of the settlements are set high above valleys, almost completely hidden by stone. Why did the Indians decide to settle here? Square Tower House at Navajo Canyon was probably built between 1200 and 1300 AD, during the latter period of the Anasazi civilization. The highest vantage point of this settlement is situated close to the main road, the Mesa Top Ruins Road. With a total of 80 rooms and 7 ceremonial areas, known as Kivas, Square Tower House is one of the region's most remarkable cliff dwellings. Even today, 60 rooms are open to the public. However, part of this settlement has been lost forever. Ruins Road leads to an interesting and impressive area that contains a number of pit dwellings and pueblos. These give a good and fascinating insight into the historical and architectural development of this region's early Native American inhabitants. Thanks to numerous discoveries, the everyday life of this region's original Indian families has gradually become more apparent. The first human inhabitants of the Mesa Verde reached the high plateau about 1,500 years ago. They lived in subterranean pit houses. Various traces date back to the basket makers, cross subsequent generations of pottery culture, and finally reach the builders of the Pueblos. However, the reason why the Indians vacated their villages on the plateau and in the rocky canyons below is not known. Hopefully, future excavation will provide the answer. Like a great fortification, Balcony House extends within a long, flat, rocky niche of the Soda Canyons below the Chapin Mesa. A visit to this cliff dwelling is only possible by way of a guided tour accompanied by a park ranger. The path leading to Balcony House is quite dangerous and full of difficulty for the inexperienced. An 11-meter-high ladder leads up to the remote ruins of the Anasazi. Even today, access to this cliff dwelling is still quite tricky. Only those who have no fear of heights dare look down into the depths below. The treacherous and adventurous ascent is an outstanding and at the same time worthwhile experience, as Balcony House has a unique atmosphere. The construction methods of the Indians were quite highly developed, as can be seen by these walls. The settlement was most likely built during its flowering period. The techniques and methods of construction that were used to build the dwellings were continuously developed and perfected over the centuries. At the beginning of the 12th century, the settlement's advanced building design, agriculture and craftsmanship reached their peak. The golden age of the Mesa Verde civilization had begun. cultural zenith was the result of several years' refinement and improvement, and the honing of each detail of everyday life. In the course of time, the way of life of the Anasazi had changed dramatically. The Stone Age hunters and collector-gatherers had developed into farmers. Numerous basic elements had been established before the Anasazi moved into the protective rock villages. Dwellings constructed of sandstone blocks already existed above Mesa's plateau. But why did these people move into the almost inaccessible rock walls of the canyons? Did hostile forces make them do it? Unfortunately, no one knows the answer. And so far, no written accounts of the Anasazi have yet been found. Thus, most of today's knowledge of this civilization is only speculative. We must make do with archaeological facts, discoveries, and conclusions. Most of everyday life took place outside the rooms and storage areas. Various tools, pottery, and weapons of stone and wood were made there. In the foreground are circular ceremonial rooms known as Kivas. They were particularly important in maintaining good relationships between villages. The exact nature of the rituals that were held here remains a mystery. One can only speculate, but we do know that fires once burnt within these cellar-like structures. The early pit houses of the basket makers that were once located on the Mesa Verde Plateau served as the model for the Kivas. They held great religious and social significance. Even today, the isolated location of Balcony House amazes all those who see it. The settlement was truly impregnable. However, the rocky surroundings were not without problems. During winter, the stone dwellings became extremely cold and uncomfortable. It took much strenuous and dangerous effort to bring the firewood that was necessary for survival to the remote rock walls of the canyons. Several steep ladders lead out of this cliff dwelling as we return to the plateau and to the many other impressive areas of the Mesa Verde National Park. The Chapin Mesa Museum and the Fairview Visitor Center offer several interesting cultural and historical insights into the early life of those who once lived here. In addition to informative illustrations and models that depict the past, there is also a fascinating collection of ancient hunting weapons and weapons of war, such as arrow tips and spears. Several vessels and jugs made of clay are included in the exhibits. Precious treasures of a bygone time. During the 12th and 13th centuries, the Anasazi were famous far and wide for their highly developed craftsmanship. When trading with neighbouring tribes, the Indian inhabitants of the Mesa Verde obtained useful raw materials and tools. Finely crafted adornments, ribbons and clothing are also on display, as well as artistically decorated shoes, the traditional moccasin. The simple animal paintings and images within the Chapin Mesa Museum are similar to the cave paintings of the Stone Age. These archaeological discoveries provide a relatively clear picture of the early existence of the Anasazi. Not far away from the museum is the most famous cliff dwelling of the Mesa Verde National Park, Cliff Palace. This partly restored area is located beneath a mighty rock plateau, hidden and well protected within a recess on the eastern slope of Cliff Canyon. Because of its monumental size, today Cliff Palace is considered to be one of the most significant architectural symbols of the classic North American Pueblo period. In December 1888, two cowboys, Richard Wetherill and Charles Mason, discovered this well-hidden village. Cliff Palace has its own special place among the settlements of the Anasazi, and it has a decorated interior. However, the two discoverers did not leave this place untouched. On the contrary, they sensed a possible fortune and removed various precious artifacts. In subsequent years, the families of Richard Wetherill and Charles Mason enjoyed considerable wealth from the archaeological treasures of the Mesa Verde. In 1906, what is today's national park was designated as a protected area, and thus helped to put an end to much mindless plundering. The historians of North America became increasingly interested in the Pueblo villages and the former inhabitants of the canyon. In the course of time, archaeologists discovered an even larger number of the artistic objects and tools of this fascinating Indian people. Cliff Palace contains a total of 217 rooms and 23 circular underground kivas. Owing to the large number of the living, storage and ceremonial rooms, it is likely that between 200 and 250 people once lived here. It is thought that this building complex was established in the 11th century. However, only 100 years later, this rock village was abandoned. The dwellings of the Anasazi extend up several levels and are located slightly to the rear. They are constructed of stone blocks and mortar. In spite of their age, they are still quite stable. It has been scientifically proven that not men but women played the dominant role within the Indian village community. early Indian civilization of Mesa Verde was thus mainly influenced by the fairer sex. Pueblo society was therefore matrilineal, placing property rights and the line of descent on the mother's side of the family. Thus, the dwellings and all of the objects contained within belonged to the women. Everything was later passed on to their female successors. Even today, the ancient buildings of the Anasazi are still captivating. Idyllic, peaceful settings full of mystique and natural power. The attractive surroundings and historical Indian paths of this national park seem to transform time and are an unforgettable experience. For several centuries, the cliff dwellings of the Mesa Verde and the spacious cliff palace were deserted. While the dwellings belonged to the women, the Kivas were almost exclusively reserved for the men of the village. Almost 800 years have passed since North America's indigenous inhabitants suddenly and inexplicably left their rock settlements in the canyons. In some areas, the condition of the dwellings is quite amazing. On leaving Cliff Palace, it's easy to feel the protective qualities of this small, remote village, located among the narrow confines and walls of this natural rock environment. Steep ladders lead up to the plateau where the Indians once lived, and where the Pueblos were built within the rocky canyons. Secluded and tranquil, Coyote Village, that is situated above the spectacular river valleys of the Chapin Mesa, attracts many visitors. The area around Fairview House was once one of the most highly populated and developed regions in the land of the Anasazi. The early inhabitants of Fairview and Coyote Village even established a relatively complex system for collecting and distributing water. In the middle of the 20th century, a group of archaeologists discovered several Pueblo settlements and further remains on the Mesa Verde Plateau. These villages were deserted by their inhabitants. But what was the reason for this? Even now, no one really knows. One reason could be a long-lasting drought. And the latest scientific study of ancient tree trunks appears to support this theory. A long period of drought had a massive effect on the Indians' harvest. This was followed by extreme famine. From 1276, the drought lasted for more than 23 years. Springs began to dry out, and the confidence that the Indians had in their usually friendly environment eventually declined. It was as though the prayers made inside the Kivas remained unanswered. Finally, at the end of the 13th century, the Indian tribe emigrated south. When the great period of drought was over, the cliff dwellings and villages of the Mesa Verde Plateau were empty, long since abandoned by their previous inhabitants. The Anasazi never returned to their rocky dwellings. It is likely that they settled in what is today's Arizona. Only their stone ruins and pueblos are evidence of this once glorious time. Although the Anasazi civilization that once lived among the canyons of Colorado were forgotten for many years, they now enchant and fascinate people from around the world. Compared to other national parks in North America, the Mesa Verde unites the beauty of nature with the unique remnants of a remarkable period of human history.